Hey guys, the practice test is about to begin in a minute, but before we get started, I just wanted to share some quick tips so that you make the most out of this practice test. Now, this test has been developed by native English speakers with the intention of making it as close to the PTE Academic exam as they could. Now, we've also included answers for each question and explanation of the answers. So in case you get an answer wrong, you can go through the explanations wherever appropriate and find out why the answer was correct and why your answer was wrong. We also made the test in a timed manner, so you get a sense of how much time to spend on each question. And what I'll also do is, for those of you who feel that you're not going to complete this entire test in one sitting, I'll add a link in the description where you can enter your email address, and I'll send you the entire test along with the answers free of cost straight to your inbox, so that you can refer to them at a later date at your convenience. So click the link in the description if you want that straight to your inbox, and I also send out free tips via email that will help you guys clear the exam. So without further delay, let's get straight into the practice session, and good luck.
If the work for an applied force is independent of the path, then the work done by the force is evaluated at the start and end of the trajectory of the point of application. This means that there is a function ux called a potential that can be evaluated at the 2 points xa and xb to obtain the work over any trajectory between these 2 points.
The topmost limb of a bow is known as the upper limb, while the bottom limb is the lower limb. At the tip of each limb is a nock, which is used to attach the bowstring to the limbs. The riser is usually divided into the grip, which is held by the archer, as well as the arrow rest and the bow window.
Carbon is distributed throughout the atmosphere, the biosphere, and the oceans. These are referred to collectively as the carbon exchange reservoir, and each component is also referred to individually as a carbon exchange reservoir. The different elements of the carbon exchange reservoir vary in how much carbon they store.
There is no consensus among reflexologists on how reflexology is supposed to work. A unifying theme is the idea that areas on the foot correspond to areas of the body, and that by manipulating these one can improve health through one's qi. Concerns have been raised by medical professionals that treating potentially serious illnesses with reflexology, which has no proven efficacy, could delay the seeking of appropriate medical treatment.
Poe and his works influenced literature in the United States and around the world, as well as in specialised fields such as cosmology and cryptography. Poe and his work appear throughout popular culture in literature, music, films and television. A number of his homes are dedicated museums today. There is an annual award known as the Edgar Award for distinguished work in the mystery genre.
This debate about the morality of certain business practices has continued in the popular culture, as in the performances in Europe in 2012 by Bruce Springsteen, who sang about bankers as greedy thieves and robber barons. During the Occupy Wall Street protests of 2011, the term was used by Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders in his attacks on Wall Street. The Brazil nut is a large tree, reaching 50 meters tall and with a trunk 1 to 2 meters in diameter, making it among the largest of trees in the Amazon rainforest. It may live for 500 years or more, and according to some authorities, often reaches an age of 1,000 years. The stem is straight and commonly without branches for well over half the tree's height. Impermanence is one of several themes developed in this novel. Impermanence is one of several themes developed in this novel.
Unable to face reality, he withdrew deeper and deeper into his madness. Unable to face reality, he withdrew deeper and deeper into his madness.
The task was so monumental, she didn't even know where to begin. The task was so monumental, she didn't even know where to begin.
The legal process was, of course, long and drawn out. The legal process was, of course, long and drawn out.
A decision was made to go ahead with the restoration of the plaza. A decision was made to go ahead with the restoration of the plaza.
Prefixes corresponding to an integer power of 1000 are generally preferred. Prefixes corresponding to an integer power of 1000 are generally preferred.
The volume of a solid can be determined by fluid displacement. The volume of a solid can be determined by fluid displacement.
By the mid-1960s, he was writing and directing films. By the mid-1960s, he was writing and directing films.
The community has experienced a renaissance as an avant-garde destination. The community has experienced a renaissance as an avant-garde destination.
Recent advances stress the fundamentally uncertain nature of the process. Recent advances stress the fundamentally uncertain nature of the process.
Charitable organizations often depend partly on donations from for-profit organizations. Charitable organizations often depend partly on donations from for-profit organizations.
A state must make choices regarding the distribution of the tax burden. A state must make choices regarding the distribution of the tax burden.
The given image provides us with a comprehensive overview of the rock cycle. The graphic shows that igneous rock is formed from magma. If you follow the image closely, you can observe that magma is itself formed from the melting of either igneous rock or metamorphic rock. Metamorphic rock is formed when heat and pressure is applied to either igneous rock or sedimentary rock. Sedimentary rock is formed from the compacting and cementing of sediment. Sediment is formed from the weathering and erosion of either igneous or metamorphic rock. Thus, the entire process is cyclical in nature. The graph shows global smartphone sales by operating system from 2009 to 2013. The biggest winner was by far Android. In 2009, the number of smartphones sold with Android was negligible, but by 2013 it was close to 800 million and dwarfed the other operating systems. In second place, for instance, was iOS with a less than 200 million. The biggest loser over the study period was Symbian. In 2009, most smartphones were sold with Symbian, but by 2013 it had completely disappeared. During the study period, at least, the smartphone operation system market can clearly be seen, therefore as quite volatile.
This photo shows an idyllic coastal scene on a sunny day. There is a 4-storey mansion built into the steep, densely forested coastal mountain. The lowest level of the mansion has stairs going straight down to the water, which is an inviting turquoise blue. The mansion itself is perhaps Mediterranean in style, with arches and sweeping balconies. There are 2 small boats anchored just offshore. Low-lying mountains can be seen further down the coast in the background of the photo. In my opinion, this is a very beautiful and scenic photo.
The graphic shows a snapshot profile of the top-ranked universities in 4 regions. Of the 4 universities compared, the California Institute of Technology is a definite outlier. First of all, it has significantly less students than the others, just 2,181 compared to the 19,718 at the next smallest of the 4 institutions studied, Oxford. Caltech also has the lowest student-to-staff ratio of the 4, meaning in theory, students at Caltech get the most individual attention. Finally, Caltech also has the lowest ratio of both female students and staff compared, meaning it's potentially the most male-dominated.
The chart shows how much fuel is required per person to cover a distance of 350 miles using various modes of transport. According to the chart, the most efficient form of fossil fuel driven transportation, which requires just 1.5 gallons per passenger, is the bus. The least efficient form of transportation would be the average SUV, which if driven alone would require 17 gallons of fuel to make the trip. Interestingly, the average hybrid car, if driven with 4 people in it, would be almost as fuel efficient as a bus at full capacity. To conclude, there are big differences in fuel consumption depending on the vehicle chosen.
The graph shows the number and rate of fatal injuries of workers in a given region from 1997 to 2016. The most striking feature of the data is that, with some minor fluctuations, there has been a steady and gradual decline in the number and rate of injuries. In fact, it fell from a rate of about 0.8 fatal injuries per 100,000 workers in 1996 to about half that in 2016. From 2010 to 2016, the rate has remained somewhat flat, which may indicate that further decreases in the number of injuries may not be seen in the near-term future.
The map shows global homicide rates by country. Overall, the most dangerous regions seem to be Central America and the northern half of South America. From Mexico to Brazil, for example, homicide rates are consistently above 20. Much of Africa is also quite dangerous, but mostly less so than the Americas, with most countries in the 5 to 20 range. The safest regions are Europe and East Asia, with many countries showing less than 3. Mildly dangerous major countries include the US, 3 to 5, and Russia, 5 to 10. To conclude, homicide rates vary significantly by region, but Europe and Asia are the safest, and the Americas and Africa are the most dangerous.
Stereotypes really are an example of categorization. Brains have evolved, human brains have evolved to be very rapid categorizers of things. It's what allows us to interact with our world so smoothly and effectively, right? So you can go into a room and see a chair for the first time, and you know that it's for sitting and not for eating or climbing because you identify it as a member of the category chair. Stereotypes are categories of people, and sometimes they're actually very helpful. So we have stereotypes of what police officers or librarians or nurses are like. And those stereotypes allow us to fill in the blanks a little bit and know, without even talking to a member of that profession, something about what their job is, how I'm supposed to interact with them, what it's reasonable to ask of them, you know, how our interaction is probably going to go. The problem, of course, is that every stereotype is a generalization. That never applies completely accurately to any one person, and sometimes stereotypes are just flat out wrong. They're just absolutely unnecessarily negative and completely untrue.
From one perspective, stereotypes are very important and necessary for us to function smoothly in the world. Having stereotypes about people like doctors and nurses allows us to know what kind of interaction is appropriate for that person, what kind of questions it's okay to ask them, and what kind of questions it's okay for them to ask us. However, the problem, of course, is that stereotypes are never truly a predictor of any single person. Sometimes, in fact, they are just flat out wrong or negative. So while stereotypes are useful, we need to recognize that they are potentially negative.
Most people believe that there is one way that the body responds to stress. Everyone's heard the fight or flight response, but it actually turns out that that's just one way that the body and brain can respond to a stressful circumstance. And it's often not a very helpful way to respond to a stressful circumstance, especially one in which you really want to rise to the challenge and perform your best, where it's really not about survival mode. And it turns out that the brain and the body actually has another way of responding to these kind of high-stakes challenges, whether it's an important negotiation, or you have to give a speech, or an athletic competition, those moments where you really want to show up and do your best. And that other way of responding to stress is called a challenge response, that it's a way for your brain and body to give you maximum focus, attention, and energy. And it's physically different than the sort of the fight or flight response that we have when we feel deeply threatened by a stressful situation. When you have a threat response, your body and brain are shifting into the state that is really the sort of the classic association with the harmful stress response. It's going to make you more likely to choke under pressure. It's going to feel more like dread or overwhelm. When you have a challenge response, the brain and body actually shift into a state that gives you more access to your resources. Your heart might still be pounding, but your blood vessels are going to relax and open up so you get more blood flow to your muscles and to your brain. Your brain shifts into a state that's actually better at paying attention to everything in your environment, rather than sort of being laser focused like you might be in a fight or flight response on what's going wrong or what's dangerous. When you have a challenge response, all of your senses open to all of the information that's available to you, which means you're basically smarter under stress.
The lecture was a brief discussion about common misconception that there's only one way to deal with stress, the classic fight or flight paradigm. However, it has been clearly identified by the latest research that actually our body has another way of dealing with stress that can be called the challenge response. In this case, your body and brain actually rise to the challenge, which is an important point to be noted. You get increased blood flow to the brain, so in a way, you actually become smarter because of the stress.
Many websites are tracking and studying your behavior, and in a way to help you by presenting products and information that they think, that they believe, based upon your browsing history and other characteristics, are going to be of great interest to you. But there's also a darker side to that activity. While that may add great convenience to you, the truth is that that also permits them to look at questions like, what do they estimate you're willing to pay for that product? Now, a lot of people think mistakenly that you're supposed to charge the same price for a product to everybody. That's not the case. You can't discriminate based on certain criteria, race, religion, sexual preference. But it's perfectly fine for me to charge this guy more than that guy because I think he'll pay more. And just look at airplane tickets as a perfect example of that sort of thing. Now here's the problem. We're taking those kinds of decisions in these websites. And Amazon itself is a fantastic example of this. And we're incorporating very sophisticated machine learning algorithms. They're designed to manage the overall behavior of the group of people who are visiting that website in order to optimize profitability for the companies that are running those websites. And they will cut you the least slice of pie, the smallest slice of pie that they can, to get you to incent you to do what they want you to do in order to maximize the profits for the corporation.
Websites like Amazon gather information about their users. One way that information is used is to supposedly help you. Based on what products you've looked at, your demographics, browser history, and other factors, the website will offer you what it believes to be a product that you want or need. This is legitimately useful. We need to remember, however, that actually the purpose of the algorithms that run these websites is to maximize the profits of the corporation. So when we make purchases, we should keep in mind that we are probably being manipulated in some way.
Let's look in the mind of someone who suffers from imposter syndrome and see the fickle understanding they have of their own achievements. I got elected for this prestigious award. I don't know how this could possibly have happened. Maybe someone who really likes me tried to pressure the prize committee to vote for me. I cannot possibly imagine any other way of this happening. However funny as it may sound, this is a very real problem. Researchers, academics, and high-achieving women are especially vulnerable to this condition. The treatment of imposter syndrome includes group sittings where the patients discuss their lives and come to a sudden realization that they are not alone, and this is not an individual case but a common pattern among high-achieving people. As they are also very keen on dismissing praise and kind words, they are instructed to be more vigilant about doing that and to try to take in all the nourishment they get from their colleagues. These are the more common ways to treat this serious condition that poisons so many people's minds.
How did languages suddenly emerge in the evolutionary record? And it's pretty sudden by an evolutionary framework, you know, the amount of time involved. And then how come they proliferated? How come there isn't just one? Well, there's steps towards answering that. Well, there's progress, I think. My own view, I should say, is pretty idiosyncratic. It's not widely held. But I think we understand enough about the fundamental computational basis of language to see that to develop a kind of a plausible scenario for how there might have been a reasonably sudden emergence of the fundamental nature of language, and also of why the apparent diversity is pretty superficial. So that if, say, a Martian was looking at humans the way that we look at, say, frogs, the Martian might conclude that there's fundamentally one language with minor deviations. And I think we're moving towards an understanding of how that might be the case, and it is pretty clear that it has to be the case. The time of development is much too shallow for fundamental changes to have taken place. And we know of no fundamental changes. So a child from a hunter-gatherer tribe and Stone Age tribe in, say, the Amazon, brought to Cambridge and raised here will go on and become a quantum physicist at MIT. There's no known differences in relevant cognitive capacities.
The most famous argument in favor of a God-made world using logic and reasoning is the argument by design. Simply put, given how complex and amazing everything around us is, can we really believe that dumb luck put it together? Even from a scientist's perspective, life is amazing, incredibly rare, and took a monumental amount of steps, chance happenings, and time to come about. So a religious person may argue, doesn't it seem much more plausible that there was some driving force behind it all? This type of argument is called reductio ad absurdum, which simply means it attempts to disprove a statement by showing it inevitably leads to absurd or impractical conclusions. In this case, it suggests that 1. If there's no God, humans developing is very unlikely. 2. Humans did develop, therefore 3. It is unlikely that there's no God.
Machiavelli proposed that the overwhelming responsibility of a good prince is to defend the state from external and internal threats to stable governance. This means he must know how to fight, but more importantly, he must know about reputation and the management of those around him. People should neither think he is soft and easy to disobey, nor should they find him so cruel that he disgusts his society. He should seem unapproachably strict, but reasonable. When Machiavelli turned to the question of whether it was better for a prince to be loved or feared, he wrote that while it would theoretically be wonderful for a leader to be both loved and obeyed, a prince should always err on the side of inspiring terror, for this is ultimately what keeps people in check. Machiavelli's Christian contemporaries had suggested that princes should be merciful, peaceful, generous, and tolerant. They thought that being a good politician was, in short, the same as being a good Christian. But Machiavelli argues differently. He asked his readers to dwell on the incompatibility between Christian ethics and good governance.
I'm going to try to demonstrate something called regelation, which is where you provide a pressure onto ice and that turns it into water, but after that pressure is removed, it freezes again. So in order to demonstrate this, I've taken apart the high E string from my guitar and I've weighted it with these 2 bottles of water. When I apply the string across the ice, we should see the wire start to cut through the ice and perform the regelation of the ice. Well, we'll see if it works because we are outside in Sydney and it's warmer than 0 degrees, obviously. Alright, it's past 3 AM, but the experiment has been a success. I passed this wire through this giant block of ice and it's still a solid block. You can actually see the point where the wire went through here. So we pretty clearly demonstrated regelation, the idea that you can compress the ice, turn it into water, and then when that pressure is gone, it solidifies again as ice.
Brazil's economy shrank 3.8% in 2015, the most in a quarter century. The country's credit rating was downgraded to junk, and business and consumer confidence levels fell to nearly their lowest on record. Rousseff's presidency has also been strained by the massive scandal involving Petrobras, the state-run oil company. An investigation dubbed Operation Car Wash revealed a deeply corrupt organization and government. It unearthed a scheme started over a decade ago involving bribery, collusion, and kickbacks implicating Petrobras executives and Brazilian officials. Rousseff herself has not been named in the probe. What might prove Rousseff's undoing, however, are claims she doctored accounts to cover up the government's deficit woes during her 2014 re-election campaign.
So, Hume's very famous contribution to the understanding of the notion of cause is this. He asks, what do we mean by one thing causing another, or one thing necessarily bringing about another? His answer is that we get the notion of causation purely by seeing constant conjunctions of things. We see motion of one billiard ball followed by motion in another ball, again and again and again. As a result, when we see the one moving, we naturally infer that the other will move. Remember what Hume says about induction. We do that just naturally by instinct. And he thinks that that instinct is what gives us the notion of causation. We find ourselves inferring B from A, and as a result, because we find ourselves making that inference, that's why we attribute a necessity to the connection between A and B, why we say A is the cause of B. The inference comes first. We find ourselves making the inference, that's why we say there's a causal link.
And so if you're building a castle, you have to think about a few ways to defend yourself. First of all, you have to defend yourself from the outside. So it's good to have a moat. It's also good to have a really large wall, so it's hard for people to get over it. And this castle's great because it's got water on all sides of it. You also have to have soldiers, so if anybody were to ever get close to the gate, you could shoot them with arrows or pour hot tar on them. But if they were to breach the wall, you have to be able to fight them there as well. But probably when you're defending a castle, more important thing is you have to have intelligence. You have to have spies that are sent out to surrounding areas to do reconnaissance and figure out what's going on, to recognize invaders when they come.
the experiment had never been done about why time seems to move in slow motion when you're in a life-threatening situation. But I'd talked to so many people, and I'd experienced it myself, that I wanted to study that. So I found a way to study it by dropping people from a 150-foot tall tower and measuring their time perception on the way down. And that, plus several other experiments we did in my lab, led me to understand that people don't actually see time in slow motion during an event. Instead, it's a completely retrospective assessment. In other words, when you're in a life-threatening situation, your brain writes down memory much more densely. And then retrospectively, when you look at that, you have so many details that you don't normally have that it seems as though it must have lasted a very long time. That's the only interpretation your brain can make.
Now, the cutthroat negotiators know how much I can punch your buttons if I say I've given you a fair offer. And that'll immediately put you on the defensive and make you worry about whether or not you're being fair. And most people have an instinctive feeling about fair price, fair market. Fair is just like this incredibly overused term in negotiations. I just want what's fair. What's the fair market price? So if I say I've given you a fair offer and I'm accusing you of being unfair, I've immediately knocked you back on your heels. It's a way for me to gain an advantage on you, if I'm that kind of a negotiator.
More recently, we saw China delay a panda delivery following the disappearance of a Malaysia Airlines plane carrying 152 Chinese nationals.
In 2014, Malaysia was all ready to get its first panda. They had the enclosure ready at the zoo and all of that. And the day of the panda's supposed arrival came and went because the Chinese government was extremely frustrated with the Malaysian government's investigation of the flight, didn't feel that it was doing enough, and so kept the pandas for another month or two as a way to demonstrate to the Malaysian government that, yeah, you know, we've signed a regional trade deal with you, we're interested in pursuing a relationship, but you're not
when I'm procrastinating because there is indecision, and this is a particular breed of procrastination. In other words, if I have 10 things on my to-do list or 10 potential projects I could pursue, what to do in that situation? And what I ask myself is, which one of these, if done, will make the rest irrelevant or easier? This is a key question I ask all the time. Which one of these will make all the rest easier to do if done first, or all of the rest of them irrelevant, don't even need to do them? That is how I will then hone in on
create spaces and times where there was no space and time before. So now you've got no particles, no radiation, no space, no time. That sounds like nothing. But then you might say, well, you know what? You got the laws of physics. You got the laws of nature. The laws themselves are somehow something, although I would argue, in fact, that that is not at all obvious or clear or necessary. But even there, it turns out physics potentially has an answer. Because we now have good reason to believe that even the laws of physics themselves are kind of arbitrary. There may be an infinite number of universes, and in each universe that's being created, the laws of physics are different. It's completely random. And the laws themselves come into existence when the universe comes into existence. So there's no pre-existing fundamental law. Anything that can happen does happen. And therefore you got no laws, no space, no time, no particles, no radiation. That's a pretty good definition of nothing.
I personally don't like the word right and wrong because for different people, right and wrong looks very different. I think that it can be coached in a little bit of a different way. So I like to look at things that work or that don't work. I believe that human beings fundamentally want life to flourish. We love, and when we see life flourish, be it a new flower or a tree sprouting in the springtime or any beautiful new thing that we experience, a new baby, it's just, we love it, and we have a really positive feeling towards when life flourishes. So right and wrong gets it very much into a mental status, and we compare to a whole list of what we think is good for life and what we think is bad for life. But underlying, I think it's much more interesting to pay attention to whether something works to have life flourish or not.
As a Muslim woman, I anticipated that I would have an exceptionally hard day. As a Muslim woman, I anticipated that I would have an exceptionally hard day.
He now campaigns for the populist 5-star movement. He now campaigns for the populist 5-star movement.
Well, congratulations if you made it so far. You're one of the few who would have actually watched the entire video. I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching this video. Hit the like button, share this with any friends who you think would benefit from this, and also drop me a comment and let me know what you thought. Take care and good luck for your PTE exam.